Oh, there's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello BookTube, I'm Sean the Book Maniac. Welcome back to my channel. Here I am with another In Other Words. I know I promised you a part 2 of my Victober, and that's what this is, in abbreviated version, but Victober is such ancient history that I'm not going to put that in the title, but that's what it is. Right now is Vlogmas season. I'm not participating, but I also have no wish to compete and lose against all of that content flooding your inboxes. So I'm going to get maybe one more, maybe 2 or 3 more very short, In Other Words, out during December, because I think the shorter my videos, the better chance you might watch them. So here are 6 pieces of, if I've counted right, and if I don't edit one out because it ends up being really stupid, here are 6 pieces of vocabulary from the Victorian era, from my Victober readathon, and they are all from the same novel, the 1896 novel by Charlotte Young, The Carbonels. A very well written novel that was ultimately not a very good novel for a 21st century reader, and I'm not going to explain why. Let's just dive into the fabulous vocabulary that I found. First is gig, and it was obvious, I think this was on the first page, that this was some kind of a horse-drawn buggy type of thing. It was described as a high gig with a tall, old, bony horse. So, I found out that a gig is a light two-wheeled carriage pulled by one horse. It became a word in English. The first documented use is 1791. This story, if I'm remembering correctly, was set in the early 19th century. It also meant a small boat, first recorded use 1790. And they, as far as etymology, they think perhaps something to do with a whirligig, spinning top, or bouncing, giddy girl. In Danish, gig means a spinning top. Connotations of rapid, whirling motion, maybe the wheels spinning. Of course, in the modern era, gig now means a job. That meaning especially became popular among jazz musicians from around 1915. And that's what I have to say about gig. This was a phrase that my buddy reader for this novel, Lindy, in Canada, noticed and researched. She did all the legwork for this phrase, a coat of invisible green. Invisible green. The quote in The Carbonels was, the lawyer was dressed up like a country attorney and he was wearing a coat of invisible green. So there's a great web page, I will link it, it's just on some Jane Austenite's blog about this color, just fascinating. So I found out, thanks to Lindy pointing me towards this, that the phrase dates from the late 18th century and it refers to a dark green described in 1808 by the color man, the Bath color man, Bath the location, not the bathroom Bath, James Crease, who described it as a dark green so denominated from its being proper for covering gates and rails in parks, pleasure grounds, etc., by rendering them in a measure invisible at a distance on account of its approximation to the hue of the vegetation. In other words, it harmonized with all the natural greenery, and so it was given the name Invisible Green. Here are some pictures from that blog entry. This one I thought was interesting. Mayhap. Mary ran out in the midst to suggest that mayhap the defect was in the French measure. So I think you can kind of guess in context that it means maybe or perhaps. So there you go. Maybe, perhaps, mayhap. So it's then digging deeper where it gets interesting. There was a noun, hap, that dates from around 1200 AD in England, meaning chance, a person's luck, fortune, or fate, or unforeseen occurrence, which goes back to the Old Norse, same word, extra P, going back to the Proto-Germanic hap, and the Proto-Indo-European root cob, which I didn't look up, so I'm going to do that right now. Uncharacteristically, there doesn't seem to be much known about that Proto-Indo-European root, cob. Hap became a verb, which meant to come to pass, to be the case. Words that are related to that are haphazard, something that happens without being foreseen. Hapless, happen. Okay, we're going to talk about happen. Happy, mayhap, and mishap. So mishap we know. So all of those words are related. And I had never really thought about that basic word of the English language, happen, that yes, it always denotes something that was not foreseen, not planned. It just occurred, and often was negative, maybe not necessarily. And happen dates from the late 14th century. Happenin was the perhaps Middle English, and to occur by hap, to have the good or bad fortune to occur, and very much related to the word befall. In Middle English, there was a phrase, fell it hap, which meant it happened. So, happy, it comes from this same word family, and it comes from hap, chance, fortune. So, if you're happy, the original meaning from the late 14th century was that you were lucky, favored by fortune, being in advantageous circumstances, prosperous. So it also was related to good luck rather than something that you could plan for. Next is chary. There's a lawyer in the novel that's being described as chary, I think it's chary, as chary of his praise, and it means reluctant to give praise. Chary means cautiously or suspiciously reluctant to do something. Comes from an Old English word which I don't know how to pronounce. Here it is, that meant sorrowful or anxious, and in fact it is related to the care word family. Care, carefully, careless. Originally it meant, chary meant full of care, and then came to be similar to careful, but on the reluctant side of careful. Maybe the most interesting in this batch for me is that I found in the novel that a farmer rated a female character. Rated? And I soon, in context, thought it might be a variation of berated, and that is true. It's an archaic verb that means to scold someone angrily, to rate them. So that begs the question, and I know that I'm not using that phrase in the correct way, but now begs the question means what modern people use it as, because the old meaning nobody follows anymore. So let's just say it begs the question, what's the connection between rate, as in evaluate, compared to berate? And in fact, it all connects up. So rate, as the verb meaning scold, dates to the late 14th century in English. It comes from the Old French rater, meaning to impute, blame, accuse, find fault with, which goes back to the Latin reputare, which meant to count over or reflect. And reputare comes from the prefix re, which means repeatedly, and putare, which means to judge, suppose, believe, or suspect. So you can begin to see how these rate, the modern meaning, and berate are all tied up together. Putare goes back to the Proto-Indo-European root pow, which I will talk about in a minute. The prefix for berate, be, means thoroughly. It has many meanings in English, obviously, but the thoroughly one is the one that is relevant here, about, around, thoroughly, completely. I could do a whole 82-minute, in other words, on be as a prefix. But this thoroughly thing, it shows up in words such as bespatter, meaning to spatter about, thoroughly spatter, to bespatter, besprinkle, that sounds dirty, bedizened. So berated means to really rate, which means to really scold. So when we dig into the Proto-Indo-European root pow, meaning to cut, strike, or stamp, that's where the connection between rating as evaluation and rating as in scolding come together. So, as I just said, it means to cut, strike, or stamp, and look at all the words in English that we still use today, some of which it's obvious the connection, and others of which it's lost on me. Account, amputate, to cut. Anapest. I don't remember my prosody well enough to remember anapest, but those of you who do, can you explain it in a comment below? Berate, compute, count, deputy, dispute, impute, pave, pavement, pit, as in hole or cavity, putative, rate, reputation and repute. So there is where the rating, as in evaluating, and the idea of a reputation, how you are evaluated on an ongoing basis, goes back to connect etymologically with to berate or to rate somebody. And the last one is one that I didn't find anything online, so I am just telling you the way that Charlotte Mary Young explained the weird connotation she gives to the verb terrify, or the adjective terrifying, in her novel. And I would love it if anybody out there could back this up. Again, the novel is set in the early 19th century. I don't remember exactly where in England, but a mother is having trouble getting her daughter to go to school or getting her daughter to do something. And the daughter, Elizabeth, who's just a girl, is described as that, as in so, that terrifying and contrary that she would not go to school. So the daughter was so terrifying and contrary that she would not go to school. And I'm going, what? Terrifying? She was so scary that she wouldn't go to school? It doesn't make sense. And then several chapters later, we find out that a man who has just moved into this area was not accustomed to the popular use of the verb to terrify. This is actually right in the novel. And he was asking what had the child done to alarm her mother so much, and the reply is that he needed to learn that terrified did not mean frightened, but it meant tormented. So, have you ever encountered terrify to mean torment, or terrified to mean tormented? I would love more information. Google is of no help to me. I wish I had maybe we need to put Byways and Bookland on the case, because he has about 8,000 etymological dictionaries on his shelf. Fascinating. All right, that's what I got. I'm going to do a few more mini, in other words, at least one more. See how much time and energy I have, but I'd like to do at least 2, maybe 3 before the year's end, and maybe mini, in other words, are the way to go, because I have enough energy to do the research and put the videos out when they are shorter in length, and maybe more of you might watch them. That's all for now. Thanks for watching.